class number 8. I'm really excited about this session because okay, let's get started. This is Jim Quick, your memory coach and founder of Quick Learning. And this is welcome to Quick Recall Masterclass number 8. I'm really excited about this session because this session is not only are you going to learn memory techniques for this specific session, obviously, like we always do, but there's a philosophy behind this session, right? Just like there often is, because it's all about syntax. And syntax, or sequence, if you will, is that, when we're talking about achieving a specific goal, that there's always an order to certain things, that certain things have to be done in order. It's kind of like a combination lock. A combination lock, let's say there's 3 different numbers. You can have those 3 numbers, but if they're done in the wrong order, you're not going to be able to open up that combination, or that safe, if you will. And it's kind of like the safe for your brain. It's kind of like you can put the right combination in, but if you want to unlock its potential, your brain's potential, your mind's potential, if you don't put it in the right order, you're not going to get the same kind of result. And so this session is all about memorizing the memory superpower I call step by step, because there's a syntax to achievement. There's a specific order, and sometimes you need to be able to memorize things in order, things like recipes, things like directions, things like processes. Like there's a health process, maybe that there's a relationship or communication process, maybe there's a sales process in your organization, or a computer programming process, something that has to be done in this very specific order, and you need to be able to use your memory to memorize things in that order. Okay, so that's what really we're going to focus on, and we're going to borrow on some memory tools that we've learned to date, because I think review is so important. So it's a way of ingraining some of the techniques that we've learned in here. And then we're going to take what we learned with this to go over the syntax in future things. Future things like memorizing languages, things like memorizing different things such as remembering your past, because your past is just this, it's just an order of time, right? So past, present, and future, there's a direction, right? And so that direction goes into a very specific destination, or when it comes to time, some people like to use the word destiny. And so let's get started with this, and this is going to be a little bit interactive, because I'm using these slides specifically to give you some visuals and get your mind kind of moving and pumping at the same time. And so we're going to start first with memorizing things like directions. All right, we're going to start by memorizing directions, and you're thinking like, why would I be able to want to be able to remember directions? And so here's what my take is on this. Let's say that that your phone dies and you have no GPS, right? You have no GPS and you need to get somewhere. And I can make all kinds of jokes about why men don't ask for directions. But one of the things that we want to talk about here is, turn-by-turn navigation is valuable. Having technology, can be valuable, definitely. But the challenge is over-relying on modern technological conveniences also has consequences, right? There's, all of these conditions coming out. The latest one I read about recently is this thing called digital dementia. Digital dementia is basically talking about how we're outsourcing our brains to our smart technologies, to our smart devices. And because we're doing that, we have a world of maybe some level of convenience, but we're also crippling, our brain. Because if your brain is like a muscle, it grows stronger with use, but it's use it or lose it. And so, there's studies done, research now, they're finding out that some seniors aren't getting treated for early brain aging challenges such as dementia or Alzheimer's, because it's things like GPS. Because if you're waiting for a third-party device to tell you when and where to turn, you're not realizing that if you've taken this trip before, when you normally have memory lapses. And so that's a signal to get checked out by your doctor, and you're not going to get it checked out because you're not having those lapses that you would normally have. And so that's a big challenge. And so I notice some people nowadays, they can't take a simple drive to a friend's home or to the dry cleaners without depending on, on their phone, or depending on their GPS, and it makes us lazy, and so we want to also at the same time maybe even rid ourselves of that kind of GPS dependency. And so I really encourage you to make an effort to get directions from people who are online and try to memorize them because it's a great memory exercise. And different people have different memory powers, right? And so some people are extraordinary with names, some people are extraordinary at learning another language, extraordinary learning music, extraordinary learning a physical feat, whether it's dance or choreography or martial arts, and we're going to talk about that in an upcoming memory superpower for the master class is memorizing, physical movements. But then some people are just, they're good with directions. And if this is not you, I'm going to talk about that here. And now this is an example. Directions, remember, is an example of memorizing more detailed information, right? Whether it's memorizing food orders, or let's say, you need to be able to memorize the order of a recipe, in order, or let's say you're a bartender, you need to memorize the different ingredients in a very specific order. So anything that falls in that, we will even talk about, how to memorize a 7-step sales system. So for those of you who are an entrepreneur, or let's say sometimes you wear a hat called business development or sales, I'm going to take a very famous sales system that some of you may have heard of, but most people can't memorize it. I'm going to show you how to be able to memorize that. But this sales system has to go step by step by step because you can't start at the end. You have to start here, in the beginning, right? You can't go ask in the sales, for example. You can't go for a close, when, it's for step one. You always, that's something that goes on later in a sales cycle for those of you who are familiar with sales. And so let's get started with directions. And I'm just going to give you some basic tips. And the reason why I'm starting with directions is it's something that we could all relate to. You could relate to directions because, you're traveling, either walking or you're riding your bike, you're driving a car, or you're in the passenger seat of any of these vehicles. You need to be able to remember where and when. And let's say that your phone dies, or let's say you just want to use these memory techniques because you want to build some mental strength, you want to build some mental endurance, build some memory power. And so let's say you pull over and you actually do something that most people don't do nowadays and ask for directions. Let's say you're driving and you need to go to a very specific place, to pick up a family member, and you get a little lost and you ask for directions, and then the person tells you, okay, go down 3 blocks and make a left on Starbucks, and then go down and make a right on Robin Street, and give you some basic, things that you would remember, like not necessarily remember in typically a lot of people, but something that you can imagine hearing. And so how do you go about memorizing directions? And so what I would say when we're talking about directions is there's some basic, remember, we learn through visual cues and triggers, right? A lot of your memory are prompted by these triggers. And a trigger is just a fancy word, for a reminder. Something reminds you. Often, if you forget someone's name, or if you forget, that actor that's supposed to be in here, or something that you need to do, what happens a couple hours later is you often come up with that memory, right? Because something usually triggers it. And you know that the memory is there, it's just that it's dormant. And so, the reason why we call this program Quick Recall is how do you get it out, right? There's 3 parts to your memory. There's the encoding process, where memory is going, where you're storing the information, where you're bringing it in. The second is where you're storing information, and the third is where you're retrieving it or recalling it out. And so a big part of the recall is how you actually encode it in the beginning, because they say, most nearly every bit of information is inside your nervous system. It's just getting it out that's the challenge, right? They'll do hypnotherapy, or brain doctors will stimulate different parts of a patient's brain. They'll remember things to, when they're 9 years old. They can remember what day of their birthday was, or they can read signs off the street. The memory is there, so trust that. I would encourage you to do this right now. I did this at a speaking event. You just kind of take a deep breath right now. Take a deep breath and just hold your heart, and say to yourself, I trust that I have a great memory. I trust that I have a great memory. Take a deep breath. Exhale, and I trust that I'm a wonderful learner. I trust that I'm a wonderful learner, that I have a great memory, that I have a great memory. And if you could listen to this, you're following directions perfectly, right? So remember, you have to do it. Remember, you have to be active during this. So you're saying this, because remember, your mind is always eavesdropping on your self-talk. And so let's say, purposely I'm talking about this, because do you remember the directions? Do you remember you have to go down 3 blocks? Do you remember you have to make a left at Starbucks, right? And then you get to Robin Street, and where do you go? you make a right, right? And so let's say they're basic directions here. How would you go about memorizing it if you don't have something you can write down? Have you ever had the experience where you get directions from someone and you start driving, you're like, oh no, where do I go? And so that's a challenge. So I want you to be able to drive and move and operate or walk or skateboard or scooter, or jog with confidence. All right. So memory cues help you to be able to memorize this. And so triggers are what's important in this, because often when you need to remember something, you need something in the external to trigger the memory, right? Some kind of stimulus, because all learning is association. All learning is association. They say that, what are the three keys to real estate? And it's location, location, location. For memory, it's really association, association, association. If I was to actually, going back to pi, it's really the same thing. Pi is place, which is location. The I is imagination, and then the E and the entwining is association. So really it's that. We're talking about location, we're talking about imagination, and we're talking about association. And so we're going to use those same three things, PIE, easy as pie, or location, imagination, association, those principles of recall that we talked about in prior trainings, and apply that towards directions. All right. And remember, it's not just memorizing directions. Learn the principle. If you understand the guiding principle, the core principle, you could apply this towards other things. All right. Just like when we talk about learning, once you understand the learning principles, you could apply that towards anything. And so let's say we know that imagination is very important, and triggers, it's kind of like Pavlov, like does Pavlov ring a bell? Pavlov, you remember in high school or in college, psychology 101, that, these psychology experiments where you would have a dog, and then they would induce in that dog a state of hunger, by, putting some meat in front of the dog, and the dog would start to salivate, and as the dog salivates, the researchers would ring a bell, and then, take out the meat, bring out the meat, dog salivates again, you ring the bell. Do it repeatedly, 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 and then all of a sudden you could take the meat out, and all you have to do is ring the bell, and then the dog starts to salivate because it's a conditioned response. There's a trigger, all right? There's a stimulus like the bell, or a trigger that triggers an emotional response, hunger, a physiological response, which is salivation. And so we want to understand that your memory works very similar, right? We all have a smell. Like maybe it's a certain cooking or a perfume, or if it's not an olfactory, association, then there's a song. Is there a song that exists that if you listen to it, it would take you back, maybe 1 or 2 or 5 or even 50 years, right? And so that's a trigger, much like a bell that, brings back a sensation or a feeling, or even a physiological response. It can make it can make you, your heart beat. It can make you sweat. It can make you think about things. And so that's what we're talking about as triggers. So understanding this, what does this have to do with directions? Directions. So what I'm saying is, when someone says that you make a left on Starbucks, or you make a right, on Robin Street. Robin Street, Starbucks, these things are triggers. And you want, when you see that Starbucks, for it to remind you to do something. All right, you want it to remind you. This is the reminder principle. It's much like when we're going to talk about misplaced items. I'm going to show you how to be foolproof, where you're going to memorize things that you need to be able to memorize, where you put things. So you'll never have to misplace your wallet, your keys, your car, your pen, your glasses, the remote control, all those things that you forget. But part of it is having a trigger. Right, and having this focused attention that we're going to talk about when it comes to remembering directions. So the first thing is when someone's giving you directions, make sure that you're clear and you're observing, right? Because we're going back to MOM, which is motivation, observation, mechanics. Remember to listen, because most people, they're not really listening for directions because they don't even believe that they're going to remember it, much like names. So the obvious thing for all the things we're going to talk about when we're talking about the order of remembering things is always pay attention. Okay, so clear your mind. You could remember this. You could store an enormous amount of information in your brain. You can store all of the Jeopardy questions that's ever been asked many times fold. You just need to be able to pay attention. Okay, so you pay attention. And when the person tells you the directions, now, and you cannot write it down, is you need the other thing that triggers you, that helps you to remember things is, yes, you see the Starbucks and it reminds you to take a left, but you need a visual cue, a visual cue. And what I mean by that is turn into a picture, right? That's the ultimate tip, TIP, turn into a picture. And I encourage you to write notes here, because some of the stuff I'm intentionally putting in here is we've done it before, but the rehearsal of this, since we're, some of you are watching this, every single week, the rehearsal is important because that's space repetition. Remember, space repetition helps you to take things and put in your from your short-term memory to your long-term memory. It helps you to integrate short-term to long-term space repetition. And ideally, when you need to memorize the order of things, like I'm going to teach you how to memorize, different business sequences like sales, is to be able to review it. You review it 1 hour later, 1 day later, 1 week later, and 1 month later. And I'll repeat that. In order to consolidate things more quickly for people, to really take it from your short-term to your long-term memory, you want to be able to repeat it an hour later, a day later, a week later, and a month later. And then you'll own that information for life. Okay? And so that's what research has found, that space interval training, or space review, interval review, if you will, or repetition, is going to help you to remember it. So going back to remembering directions, you have a trigger, and the ultimate tip was turn into a picture. So if you need to make a left at a Starbucks, you could picture making a left there, and I'm going to show you how to be able to walk through certain things with yourself. Or you could have a visual cue that's waiting for you at the Starbucks. So the Starbucks is a trigger. The Starbucks is the bell that makes you think of the next thing. Much like when we went through chain linking, and we go through natural chain linking, that we do all the time. When I say dog, you say cat. And you say cat, you think mouse. I say mouse, you think cheese. You think cheese, you think Swiss. You think Swiss, you think Alps, and so on. There's an association, association, association. One thing triggers the next. So what does Starbucks trigger? Starbucks, if you need to make a left at the coffee shop, you need to be able to trigger like that left. And so what helps you to remember left is something that looks like that. Remember, turn into a picture. So for the left, whenever I'm driving and I need to remember to take a left, I picture something that sounds like left. I picture a leaf. Let me say it again. When I need to remember, if I'm going and getting directions, right? And think about, even if you don't need to remember directions, and you're positive you don't, think about how you're going to use this principle for memorizing things in sequence. You're taking the trigger and you're making a picture of the thing, the action you need to be able to take. And so the action is turning left. And in order to remind me of left, I picture a leaf, because leaf for me sounds like left. Now other people could use something else, right? They could think, politics. They could think left. They could think of anything else that reminds them of the word left, like something like leftovers. So maybe there's Tupperware, and that's what they use to be able to remind them and take a left. But whatever it is, it's always just one thing. Let me say it again. When you need to be able to remember directions, right? Left and right become very important, in the process. So turn left into a picture and turn right into a picture. Whatever picture, there's no right or wrong for this. Pardon the pun when I'm saying right, if you will. It's just good, better, and best. There's no right or wrong. There's just good, there's better, and then there's best. And so for me, I use a leaf to remind me of left, and I've used it for 20 years. And I'm very good with directions. That's given to me. So I could actually go and I'll go on Google Maps, I'll get the directions and I'll look at it, and I'll just memorize it, and then when I'm driving, I'll know exactly where to go. And so make a left here. And so what I'm doing here is I use a leaf for left, and you might use leftovers, using Tupperware, like leftovers or a doggy bag. Maybe that reminds you of left. Whatever it is, pick one thing. You have it? Great. Now what we're going to do is you need something that reminds you of right. So what's your image? Remember, imagination. What's your image for right? I'm just going to give you a moment to think about that right now. What can you use to remind you of the word right? Make sure you drink some water too. Now, for right, some people will use a plane, right? Some people will use a plane. Why would they use a plane? Because maybe the Wright brothers, right? Wright. The Wright brothers created the first plane, and so they would maybe use one of those old planes to remind them to make a right. For me, I use a pen. Very simple. I use a pen. So whenever I need to remember to make a right somewhere, instead of a left, which I use for leave, I just picture a pen, a gigantic ballpoint pen. Reminds me, because what do I use a pen for? I use it to write. And that's what reminds me to make a right when I need to. So something simple like driving down a few blocks, let's say it's 3 blocks, and you can even, if you want, or let's say it's 3 miles, that's why the number method, we went through numbers previous to this. Let's say you need to go, 3.8 miles, down, and then make a turn on Starbucks. Even if you wanted to remember 3.8, for me, 3.8 is just movie. You remember going to the alphanumeric system? The alphanumeric system is taking numbers and turning them into, sounds. So if I need to go 3.8 miles or kilometers, 3 is 8 is I just think movie, right? And then, so let's say you need to go 27 miles, 27 miles and get off at exit, get off of the, the 23rd exit, so third, if I need to be able to remember 27 miles, I think neck, because 7 is neck. If I need to remember get off the 23rd exit 23, name, or gnome, like those garden gnomes that you see, those little kind of like those little hobbit characters that you find that, in the gardens, those little statues. So that would remember that. So remembering directions, you're combining chain linking, you could be combining the alphanumeric code, you could be using the sun list very easily. Let's say you need to go down, 17 miles, or go on to Route 17. So 17, according to the sun list, going back to the sun list, is the name of a magazine, right? If it was, number 12, it could have been roses. So let's say you need to go 12 miles or 1.2 miles, or you need to get off the 12th exit, or you need to make a right on, 12th Avenue. Then, or, making a right on 12th Avenue, I just put a pen for right? And then 12 for me is tin. So I'm literally just writing on tinfoil, and that reminds me of the thing that I need to do. So I'm thinking, okay, I need to get off at exit 12. I need to be right at exit 12, or right on 12th Street. 12 for me is tin, and I just put a pen, make it a tin. The other thing you could do, though, if you want to use the location method, is just plot the directions around your home. Plot the directions around your home. So let's say you have your house list, right? And you're standing in a doorway in your imagination of the very first room, and you're looking around the room, and let's say the very first thing you need to do is you have your first place there. You think you need to make a left on Starbucks. So imagine going to your first place in your home really easily. Let's say there's a radiator there, and you just imagine right on the radiator, there's a Starbucks there, and it's full of leaves. And that's really simple, right? So the very first thing you need to do, you go into your home, you're driving, and you're doing this safely, is just imagine, what's the first place? Oh, it's this radiator. What are you cooking on there? Oh, Starbucks coffee. And what is it full of? It's full of leaves. You have the directions right there. You go to your second place. Let's say the second place in the room is the plasma television, right? And you need to make a right on Robin Street. And so the second very next thing you do, and if you want to store it in permanent directions like that, you go to your second place, the plasma TV, and what's sitting on the plasma TV? There's a red robin, right? And what are you doing on it? You're writing on it. You're using your highlighter on the red robin, you're making it all orange, and then you have the directions, right? So next time when you're in your car, you just go in your home and you're thinking like, oh, what was on the radiator? Oh, it's Starbucks. What am I doing? What is it filled with? Leaves. Make a left on Starbucks. Right, and then you go, and then what do you hit? Next place is your plasma TV. What's on there? There's a robin. What do you need to do? You need to make a right, because you're writing all over the robin with your pen, right? So that's very, very basic directions. But notice what we've done here as a practice, because remember, training is 4 things in the system. Training is we give you the tools, right? The memory techniques, if you will. Second thing is we give you the toughness, because by using the tools, it's improving your focus, it's improving your creativity, it's improving your imagination, it's improving your concentration, it's improving your level of presence and your creativity, all those different things. And by default, it's building your memory, because each and every one of those things are important for your memory. Now, just remember that your brain craves novelty. Your brain craves novelty. That's what it's built on. And so the reason why these techniques work, and one of the reasons why children are such fast learners, is they're always going and exploring, and they have fascination more than adults. But what we're doing here is we're making the ordinary extraordinary, because that's one of the principles of quick recall, right? It's taking the ordinary and making it extraordinary. Like, I'm going to show you how to memorize in here recipes, and memorizing, making, sales processes and sales presentations, and memorizing food orders or whatever it is. But the reason why it works is we're taking ordinary recipes or ordinary bar drinks or ordinary sales, and we're taking them and making them extraordinary inside your mind by making it emotional, by making it visual, by making it weird and exciting and unique and novel. And so that's the principle. All right, so when you're going through directions, remember, you could use the location method, you could use the sum list for numbers, you could use the alphanumeric code for numbers, you could use easy as pie because you have place, imagination, and you're entwining. But you do this, okay, because make an effort to get directions and to be able to memorize them, because this is what's going to awaken, if you will, your memory superpower for these things. And you'll find that you'll start memorizing other things that are in order, sometimes without even trying, because you're building these neural pathways. It's all about building a bigger brain. If people ask me what I do in like 6 words or less, I build bigger brains. I help people's brains get bigger, and I help people make connections, and that's very simple. And so one of the things that builds bigger brains, that makes more, white matter, if you will, in your brain, to make deeper connections, literally denser connections in different parts of your brain, is neuroplasticity, is new learnings. Okay, so it's oxygen because your brain runs on oxygen. It has everything to do with putting yourself in different brainwave states, which we're going to talk about when we talk about language learning. And it also has to do with novelty, making very new connections. Because all learning, and write this down, all learning is taking something unknown and associating it to something that's known. Connecting something you don't know to something you know. That's all of learning. It's taking something you don't know and connecting it to something you know. And if you want to accelerate that process, not just use repetition, use your imagination, use association, use location, use emotion. All these things are going to drive the mental grooves deeper, so that way how it manifests, or how it actually creates, is like you have information not on the tip of your tongue, but you have it at your mental fingertips. As fast as you want it, you have quick recall. For the things that you want it comes out of you because you've conditioned it, right? And so there's a difference between just, having like necessarily like a positive attitude, or having just, having a level of energy or vitality, and having like real fitness, right? Fitness is like you're prepared, so having mental fitness is you're ready to go at any time. And that's what's important right now. So let's go through that, and let's talk about memorizing other things in order. I remember years ago, the reason why I'm even talking to you today is I had like a little bit of intervention at a very young age. When I was 8 years old, I remember I was going to a family reunion, and I was at a restaurant, and 25 of us go out, and we go out there, and the waitress takes everyone's order. It's a very, very busy Saturday night, and there's 25 of us. And halfway through, I noticed something funny. She wasn't writing it down. Have you ever had a waiter or a waitress like this? And at the time, at 8 years old, I was still, even like I am right now, I'm very skeptical. And skeptical, I don't mean negative. Skeptical is just, you want to know the truth. Because that's what I was feeling, and even at an early age. Because things didn't work for me. So I tried everything, I thought, and nothing worked, because I had all these learning challenges growing up, and I would try all these different things, and because things didn't work for me, I just stopped. I think, I was thinking that maybe that not everything that is out there would help me. I got skeptical. I'm thinking there's just no way. When she comes back, she's going to get everything wrong. We're going to, send stuff back. We're going to have to trade plates and everything. But when she came back, She got every single thing perfect. She got every single thing perfect. I mean, the drinks, the appetizers, the salad dressings, how we wanted the meal cooked, the desserts. I mean, it was flawless, and it was such an incredible thing to see. And who she was for me is she was, my Roger Bannister, right? What did Roger Bannister do in '54? He broke the 4 minute mile, right? Throughout human history, no one could run a mile in less than 4 minutes. All of a sudden, he was able to do it using his imagination. He had physical training, but everyone had physical training. What he was doing is he was imagining himself crossing the finish line, looking at the clock, and it says 3:59, because he knew what you know. He knows what leaders know. And leaders, what they're most known for is taking the invisible and making it visible. That's what they do. They're creators. They take the invisible and a thought, an idea, an image inside their mind, and they take it and they literally push it out into the world so it exists on the outside also as well. And I would say one of the things that actually does that is writing things down. Because the very nature of writing things down, taking notes on what you're saying right now, putting your goals down and putting it on bulletin boards, is you're taking that image that was in your mind and you're making it physical reality. And it depends what you want. If it's that trip, it's that car, it's that health, or it's that body, that bank account, that happy family, whatever that is, even if it's an image or a picture or a word, it's still something outside of your mind. So it's the very first step is just writing it down or putting together what they call a vision board. And then if it's not a vision board, I'm even more excited, honestly, about a gratitude board. And it's not a side tangent because this is very important for your memory, is emotional fulfillment. Because notice that the emotion tied to information becomes long-term memory, but what steals a lot of that is stress. It steals a lot of that stress. So having a vision board for what you want. And so going back to what this waitress did, being my Roger Bannister, she shook up my mind, because after Roger Bannister ran the 4 minute mile, what happened? No one could do it for 1,000 years. What happens after that? Dozens of people started running a 4 minute mile over the next few years. Now, was there a big advancement in shoe technology and in physical training and nutritional supplementation? No, of course not. What was it? What was the change? The change was the belief. They shook up a belief. And what this woman did, this waitress, is she shook up my limiting belief in terms of show me what really was possible. And that's why when I go on stage, I'll often memorize things, names or numbers or words or what have you, as a demonstration of what's possible, not to impress people, but more express to them what they could really do. Because you could do it too. It's just we were told this lie. And so when it comes to memorizing, food in order, let me tell you, because I've had the opportunity to work in train a lot of people in hospitality at some of the most amazing hotels, some of the most amazing resorts, some of the most amazing restaurants. So I'm going to give you a couple of tips. And the reason why I'm giving you these tips is so that you can apply these towards other things. It's not, maybe your vocation is hospitality. Maybe you need to be able to memorize food orders, but maybe it's not food orders. This program, this masterclass is really focused on career, learning enough knowledge so that you perform better at your jobs. You can be an expert in your field, and so you can advance things in a very rapid way. But think about when I talk about how some of the best waiters or wait staff, if you will, are able to memorize orders. See how you can apply that towards your job, your vocation, and because you'll find the principles are exactly the same. So I'm just going to kind of go through these. Now, one of the things that obviously, now this is independent of writing things down, because that's the obvious thing. Obviously, it helps you to be able to memorize something, to be able to write it down. But, what if you can't write it down? And the reason why, I'm brought in to train so many people in hospitality is because when you can walk into a restaurant and they can recognize you by name, it doesn't matter. I went to a recent, Japanese restaurant, and, the person called me out by name. That's a standout skill. And even when I know, this is when I know it's a powerful, even because I know how they do it, and it still works on me. And that's when I know that it's a powerful principle, because everyone loves the sound of their own name. Everyone knows, when somebody comes into your place of business and you know what their favorite order is, or you know what their favorite drink is, or you know what their favorite dessert is, what happens to be, their birthday or a special occasion or the name of their spouse. those things show you care, because people don't care how much you know, they know how much you care. And it's not just about names, it's about the things that are most important to you. The most important to them, and it becomes what's most important to you. That's why it's important to you, because it's important to them. Because it has nothing to do with about being interesting. Communication has little to do with being interesting. People know that I have the opportunity, because of what I do, to meet some extraordinary individuals, and I do it mostly because I like to learn from them. But it's not me trying to be interesting to them, it's me being interested in them. There's a subtle difference, because it's only a couple letters, but it changes everything. When you're interested in somebody else, people feel that. And so when it comes to learning, wait staff, first of all, do a motivation check. And remember, it doesn't matter what your occupation is. If you're interacting with a human being, then you can be able to apply these kind of techniques. All right, so I'm going to use food as an example to memorize the order of food in a specific order. Okay, and I'll show you. And we'll talk about recipes a little bit. We could talk about drinks and such like that, because I put some drinks in order there. As kind of a prompt, and it's easy. Some people like this better than they like maybe looking at necessarily on me on video. So here's what you do. And so one of the things is just remember MOM, first of all, motivation. So if you're serving others, remember, do a motivation check. Remember the motivation metric. You see, you have a motivation scale here, metric from 0 to 10. How motivated are you to be able to remember their food orders, for example? And if it's a 2, you got to get it up to a 5, or get it up to a 6, or you get it up to an 8 or 9, because every single jump in numbers, it's almost a geometric growth in your ability to be able to remember that. All right, so even going from a 6 to a 7, or a 6 to a 9, it seems like a 1 or 2 jump. That 1 or 2 jump could be twice as much. That a 2 jump in going from 5 to 7 could be a multiplier of 2 in your ability to remember it. I'll say that again. When you do the motivation metric, right, and you're going from a 5 to a 7, it's only a 2 jump, right, a difference of 2, but that could be 2 times the results that you're getting, in my experience. And so motivation, and then obviously observation. When you're taking orders, you're completely present, like President Clinton is when he's remembering things, remembering names, and you're listening for it. All right. Now, after that, I've noticed a trend when I'm because as I'm going to restaurants, and I happen to do that often because I'm often traveling and not, at home. One of the things that they'll do is they'll ask customers if they have questions about the menu. All right, they'll literally, and the pattern is, because I'm always looking for the pop, the patterns of power. I'm always looking for the patterns. And I've noticed some of the top wait staff that I've had experience with, they always ask if you have questions up front. Now, that's kind of an obvious thing to do, but not all of them do that. But I'll tell you mentally one of the things it does. Besides that, it helps for them to feel understood and, like as a guest and everything else like that. What it does is it gets them, before they're taking the order, it gets them to get the questions out. Because the challenge as a public speaker, or if somebody that's serving a lot of people, is distraction, right? And there's a pattern interrupt. And one of the challenges to your memory is pattern interruptions. And so whether you're on stage and let's say you're giving this talk on 10 points on how to remember, 10 points on sales, or 10 points on how to be healthy, or 10 points how to unlock your superhero brain, whatever it is, somebody asks you a question halfway through, and then what happens when you're done answering that question? A lot of people forget where they were. And that's why the location method is so powerful, because if you forget where you are, you just continue walking around your home or walking around your office, wherever you place the information, the key points to what you need to remember. So let me say it again. One of the biggest challenges to your memory sometimes are interruptions. You're walking down the hallway, specifically having to do something. Somebody comes up to you, they have a conversation with you, and then you're like, what was I doing? Right? And that's the challenge. And so one of the reasons, now think about this in meetings, which you do if you need to be able to have your focus. Think about in presentations and sales calls. And in this example is, as a wait staff, before they do anything, they'll say, do you have any questions about the menu? And they do this before they start taking the order, because here's why they do it, is because once they start taking the order, people have questions. If they're not right, because let's say they want to memorize it, somebody has a question that takes them off a tangent, they're going to forget about what they were doing and where they were and what the previous orders were. And that's the big challenge. All right, so what they'll do is switching between memorizing what they need to remember for someone's order and providing answers can cause some of the details of their memory to be able to slip. All right, so that's the challenge. The other thing that wait staff will do, now apply this towards your meetings or whatever your vocation is they'll, when somebody is taking an order, what they'll do is they'll use some kinesthetic motion. Kinesthetic, because we know that's what's going to help your memory is using more of your senses. Right, so visualizing something, saying it, because they'll repeat the order often, many times. But kinesthetic, like pointing to a menu, which you'll notice some wait staff will do, they'll point to it. That becomes a physical anchor. Because later on, they only need to memorize this for a couple of minutes, right? Because after they're done, they're just going to go back to their computers and enter it in. They need something like you need something the first minute or so before it gets lost. And so pointing at something will help them to be able to remember that. And so pointing at the menu, for example, will help them to remember it. And then another technique that they'll do, like I've just mentioned, is they'll say the order. So they'll repeat it. And the reason why they repeat it is because they want to make sure they observed it correctly. Going back to mom, the O stands for observation. So going through and, somebody says that they want the linguine and the white clam sauce with a side salad, they'll repeat it. Linguine, white clam sauce, side salad, what's the dressing? They'll repeat it because that's their auditory memory, just like we were talking about kinesthetic memory. But they also repeat it because they want to make sure they heard it correctly. Let me say it again. They'll repeat it because they want to make sure they heard it correctly, because often busy restaurant, Saturday night, maybe they didn't hear it correctly, so they want to be able to do that also as well. The other things they'll do, obviously, and this is just, without saying, but I'll say it anyway, is the top people doing this, they have an organization, right? They have a very specific organization, because your memory works best when it's organized, right? Organized by place, or organized by subject, or organized by food groups, or what have you. And so they'll organize and then they'll go around the table often, right? And the table setting is, why it's funny, so the wait staff will come out and they'll take, everyone's order, and they'll come back, and maybe the servers will come and they'll bring their orders out. Maybe it's not the original server, but they'll know exactly where it is based on the number, of the seat that they're in, because, often there's a seating chart that's associated with it, and then there's a certain number that's closest to the kitchen, and then going clockwise. If you ever wondered how somebody who's coming with your order who didn't take your order knows where it goes, is because it's number coded, right? And so that there's a specific number that's associated with something, and then and it'll go like closest to the kitchen would be that number, and then going clockwise around. So everything has patterns. But speaking of ordering for food and having an organization, what they'll do is they'll take one order at a time, one table at a time, because you could take and submit orders for each table individually. It definitely prevents things like missed items or mix-ups and everything else like that. Another thing that they'll do, I'll notice, is when somebody's taking an order, they'll actually visualize the plate itself. So one of the things they could do, and I teach this we're going to do a session on being the life of the party, and how a lot of people memorize things about people, and how they memorize cards, or if they're playing bridge or they're playing Go Fish, and you want to see what cards or rummy that people are collecting, they're literally attaching the number of the card to the person, so that they know, like, oh, that person's collecting diamonds or whatever, or high cards or sevens or whatever. They're literally pinning that information, much like you would pin information about that you want to memorize about a client. And so if somebody's telling you something, you're just building that into a story method. And that's another method that we went into before. And the reason why I'm elaborating on this is because this has nothing to do with memorizing food orders. It has everything to do with memorizing everything else that you want for your job. Because maybe your job, unless you are a server in a restaurant, all of these principles, all these techniques can be applied towards everything else. Right? So what the high-end servers will do is they'll visualize the plate. When guests are ordering something off the menu, they'll picture the plate inside their head. Literally on the screen of their mind, they'll picture the plate. Getting more advanced, right? We know the PIE, pie, is the same thing. Is you don't need to know the people. Let's say they're not asking for their name specifically, although it definitely does help. What we could do is take that place on that person. Let's say they have a very distinguished nose, or they have crooked teeth, or they have a really great hat on, or whatever. You take that place, easy as pie. Pick the place, imagine the food, and then you put the image, entwine at the E in pi, you're entwining the image on the place, and then you know that. But we do the same thing with cards. We do the same thing with collecting other things about a person, so sports and so on. And so it's very effective, as they modify their side items, let's say an entree, they'll visualize that as well. And this is extremely effective and efficient for visual learners, people that visualize things really experience, the people that, your experience of people who could easily see the different parts of a meal or different entrees at a restaurant comes in extremely handy. And this is a primary method that a lot of people use to memorize steps. And it serves also, even if they're writing something down or doing other techniques, it's a really good backup. It's a really good redundancy. Then sometimes what they'll even do is they'll memorize the menu. A lot of people, they'll know, just like a lot of our speed readers, they'll develop such an crazy attention and focus that they'll remember where certain pictures were in different parts. If you've gone through our quick reading, speed reading program, I do this whole thing on how to memorize technical information, what page other information was. You start to develop a fidelity, a very clear representation of where this information is on a page, because that's the location method. Remember, we store information in locations outside of ourselves because of human survival. We needed to know where the clean water was, where the food was, where enemy tribes were, where fertile soil were, location. And so you could also, besides visualizing, the actual meal, you can visualize the actual menu, all right? And so you could actually imagine yourself them marketing it on, what they're ordering right on the menu that's up. So it's a really good process for helping mitigate, and you know what that word is, even if you didn't know it before because of the vocabulary session, distraction that may occur when you're doing other steps. If for any reason you lose an order in your head, this allows you to retrieve the mental images that we had before. It also allows you to keep straight any confused items that might be found, on different places on the menu, for example. All right. Now, these methods that we're talking about, you could also apply it as you're looking at this picture right now, and we're using this as an anchor, is drinks. Because you wonder, like recipes, how does bartenders, they do so well, and one of the things what really the key, just like in any kind of hospitality, besides remembering people's names, is memorizing all the drinks, memorizing drink orders. Somebody goes up there and it's really loud at night, and people are shouting out 5 or 6 different drinks, same techniques they use for memorizing drinks. And part of this comes through toughness, right? Toughness meaning repetition. They're doing it so often, they start getting really good at it. What I'm talking about is how to get to that level of competence, using these mnemonic devices. Mnemonic is just a fancy word for memory devices. And so, that's what we're giving you. And so let's give you a couple of tips on how to be able to memorize, like, for example, drinks. And this is just the sequence of and the order of specific ingredients. But ingredients could be a computer program, right? It could be a computer, it could be a language, it could be a process. What we'll do is talk a little bit about sales. It could be a sales process. And so what are we doing here? Well, talking to bartenders, and that's all I do. So it's not all I do is talking to bartenders. Like, I spend a lot of time in bars because I don't really drink. But one of the things that you could do is be able to. I interview people all the time. I came up with these techniques, years, decades ago, because I would read a lot, I would research a lot, but I would role model. And I noticed that bartenders were extraordinary at memorizing recipes, hundreds and hundreds of different drinks and cocktails, and mixes. So how do they do it? I'll just give you a number of the tips. First, they make it a study, all right? So that's obviously, this is their livelihood, so they study, and they study those things. They're smart because they focus on the 80-20 rule. The 80-20 rule is the 20% of the information that's giving them 80% of the rewards. So they look at the ones that are ordered the most, right? They're looking at and they're organizing it too. So they have their most ordered things that's most often. And the principle here, again, it's not bartending, right? Unless that's your vocation. The principle for memory here is the Archimedes lever. If you have a lever long enough, you can put a little bit of energy into it and you can move the whole world. It's the 80-20 rule, Pareto's principle. the 20% that's going to give you 80% of the results. So you'll find in every area of the things that you need to memorize that the 20%, like these are the top 20 names that's going to give you 80% of the results, the 20%. These are the 20 ingredients that you want, the 20% of the ingredients that are going to give you that you're going to use the most. These are the 20 facts or the words or what have you. And so they're focusing on it. So let's say it's bartending, and you're thinking, okay, well, I need to know, martinis and cosmopolitans and Manhattans and margaritas and mojitos and iced teas, and that's would be their organization. And so they would focus when they're studying on the things that are going to be most useful. And so how can you apply that to the things you need to memorize for your business? What are the areas that's going to give you the most bang for your buck, if you will, what's going to make things explode in a positive way. The other things they'll do is they'll have some kind of system, some kind of mnemonic system or memory system to organize information. Lots of them, they'll use some kind of app, or if you get really fundamental, they'll put things and write them down, like the recipes on index cards, or they'll create like flashcards, and they'll alphabetize them, and they'll file them by drink, or they'll by name, or they'll put it in some kind of Rolodex, because it's organization. The principle there is organization. And so putting things on index card, organizing them is useful because we learn better with organization. If I give you a list of 20 random words and I say, how do you need to remember? And you don't know the peg list and all the other chain link and all the other things that you now know. So they only get a few. But if I say, okay, here's 20 words, and these words are going to be fishes, and they're going to be colors, and they're going to be presidents, and they're going to be state capitals, you're going to remember a whole lot more because it's organized. All right, so that's another hack, if you will. Another thing they do, besides having like the whole Rolodex, on the note cards, is they'll quiz it themselves, right? They'll test themselves, and so that's one of the most important things, because questions are the answer. Questions are the answer. Like, I would rather not be thinking about the answer so much. I'd rather spend more time thinking about what's the correct question. What's the correct question that I want to be able to answer? And so that's where I put my focus on. But one of the things that would help you to be able to memorize things is to be able to quiz yourself. And so that's why in here we do lots of things where I say memorize this or practice this or give yourself this homework, and then so you can practice it. The other things that will help you to be able to do this is memorizing. Let's say you're a bartender. That's going to help them memorize it better is to understand the vocabulary. Whether you're a computer programmer, or you're a translator, or you're into let's say you're an artist or what have you. One of the things that's going to help you interact with an individual to be able to help boost your memory when you're doing these is to know the vocabulary. And that's why we went through like words, spelling words and vocabulary words, because in boosting your vocabulary is going to help you to memorize things like drink orders. And again, we're not talking about drink orders here. Specifically, we're following recipes and things in step by step. So, understanding, what the definition of these words are. When someone says something is chilled, or it's neat, or it's on the rocks, or with a twist, or it's extra dirty, or it's, some kind of dry drink, or it's sweet up, whatever the words are. And I happen to know a lot of these, again, not because I drink a lot, because I train people. And, one of my backup plans is to be on Jeopardy. Just have so much information in my mind because I'm teaching people how to do this stuff, right? So in the process of teaching them all this stuff, I learn all this stuff also as well. But another tip for memorizing this kind of information is memorizing the definitions. And again, I'm pulling all of the previous techniques into this because that's why it works, because we're borrowing on all the other techniques, because we're applying it in different stages, right? So this is specifically on step-by-step stuff. So quiz yourself, organize the information, make index cards for everything, know the 80-20 rule. What are the 20% of the things that are most likely going to be ordered on the menu, or ordered in your job, or most common names, whatever the things that are most common. Get good at those first before doing other things. Get good at those things first before you get other things. Now, another thing that you could do, let's say you're a bartender, is also put things into categories. Put things into categories inside your mind, not only knowing the things that are most ordered most often, martinis, Manhattans, cosmopolitans, stuff like that. Put things in categories. So there are only so many categories. So what are the categories that you have in your business? in your vocation? What are you studying at school? What's in your career? When it comes to going through alcohol, there's only so many different categories, right? So you have gin, you have tequila, you have whiskey, you have rum, you have vodka. You only have so many categories. So the categories, as we talked about, helps you to be able to memorize this. So you could list them, and then just order things based on the alcohol, and then you have ways of organizing the information. Another thing that helps, bartenders, which think about how you could apply this towards your work, is they use kinesthetic movement. Kinesthetic movement, like literally places around the bar or places where they're storing the alcohol. They know exactly where everything is, or movements in their body. Just touching some of these ingredients helps them to be able to remember a drink. So just let's say they need to memorize, specific ingredients, and they'll actually feel, the lime, or they'll feel the ice, or they'll feel the weight of the bottle of specific alcohols or juices that they're adding into it. And so there's lots of different variations here. So what I'm saying is touching the bottle, or touching or smelling, the alcohol, all that creates anchors. The more senses you use, they call it synesthesia. Synesthesia. It's an overlapping of senses. So you're doing this manually yourself. You're doing this manually yourself. So that would be the goal. And so what you're doing is you're studying these things, and they're studying the recipes. We're using these techniques to study things, and you're creating step-by-step patterns, or recipes, if you will, for each of these alcohols, and you're studying them every single day. You're having spaced repetitions. And this includes everything, that they're talking about, whether you're adding coffee, or you're doing shots, or doing anything else like that. All could apply. And obviously you're not going to, probably if you're listening to this, chances are, a very small percentage of the people in the population are anything, just like whether it's bartenders or waiters or programmers or translators or teachers or musicians or what have you. Apply this, if you're a bartender, and apply this towards your thing that you're going to do. Now, the next thing I want to be able to memorize, because we're going over time in this session because there's a lot of information, is I want to apply something to something ambiguous, or actually in something that's going to actually, ambiguous in meaning abstract enough that could be applied towards anything. And I think one of the things that every single business has is this thing called sales, because a business is not a business until it can make a sale, right? There's a transaction that goes on. And so this is for people, and now I'm going to teach this sales. I'm not going to teach a sales process for you. I'm not a sales trainer, but I'm just going to, take a book, and I'm going to, talk about their different steps. And I'm not going to go into detail because because that's not the purpose of this. But my purpose of going through this is, how do you remember these different things, in order? Remember, the purpose of this session is mastering your memory superpower for step by step. And so there's a sales system, right? There's everything in your business has to do with input and output. And in between, there's a system. And that system might be marketing. That system might be production. That system might be public relations. That system might be advertising. That system might be sales. And so you always want to think about the system, right? And so you should also read that book called The Goal, which is all about systems. Anyway, one of the big systems that you want to be able to master if you own your own business, or you wear some kind of sales hat or business development hat, is this thing called sales. And I'm just taking a book here that's called You Can't Teach a Kid to Ride a Bike at a Seminar. And it's the Sandler Sales Institute's 7-step system for successful selling. And so what are the 7 steps? So I'm going to go through these 7 steps, and then what I like about this, these aren't 7 elements for mastering sales. They're not 7 principles, although it's principle based. It's a system, meaning it's a step-by-step system. Every single thing must be checked off before you go to the second part, right? Just like if you're making, a cake, you're not gonna just bake a bunch of flour and sugar and chocolate and then cook it and then put eggs in it, right? There's a sequence that you need to put it in, otherwise you're not gonna get the result that you need. And so sales, according to this system, is very similar. There's 7 steps, but you have to complete step 1 before you go to step 2, otherwise you won't get the result. And you can't do it out of order, right? You can't have somebody do some kind of fulfillment and then go through and talk about their budget. That doesn't even make any sense. Okay, so this system is based on 7 steps, and I'm not going to go through it in detail, but because that's not my purpose is to teach you sales, although you might get a couple of distinctions on sales that might just pay for this entire program, for your business. But basically, the Sandler Sales Institute was founded by this guy named David Sandler, who wrote this book. And when he was developing this sales system, he chose this imagery of a submarine to communicate his vision. He literally used a submarine to communicate his vision as a metaphor, because really good teachers use story and they use metaphor so people could have a hands-on kind of experience or visual image of something, and so that for the metaphor to be able to hold. And he was inspired by watching movies of like old World War II movies. He chose to use a submarine, and when submarines were attacked, in order to avoid disaster, like if there was a leak, in the submarine or what have you, the crew would literally move through each compartment, and every time the crew would go to the next compartment, they would have to close the hatch and lock down the previous area before they could go to the next compartment, otherwise they would drown. So his system, the Sandler selling system, requires you to do the same procedure. In order to be able to avoid disaster in your business or in sales, to move completely through each compartment, step by step, going through the system, and so you can arrive safely at the end, which in here is the sale. So here's the system that you're looking at, and it's 7 compartments. And again, I'm not endorsing this, I'm just using this as an example for content to be able to memorize, but I'm going to go through it, but you understand step by step here. And so often what they'll do is, and I'll give you a brief description of each of these 7, just to give you some context. Okay, so the very first step in the system is bonding and rapport, because David Sandler believed that establishing a relationship is the first phase of a selling system. So the first compartment provides kind of the steps in the phase. So he says bonding and rapport. That's the part of the submarine that you, if you're a business owner or you're a salesperson, you not only have to develop a positive relationship with, I guess the word would be prospect, as opposed to a customer, but you have to do so in a way that ensures that you're able to lead the sales process forward, so you can, effectively talk about, your product or your service, and so bonding and rapport is the first part of the system. The second part of the system, once you establish rapport, but you can't go to the second step, upfront contracts, until you have rapport, right? And so his system says once you establish the rapport, you go to the next compartment, which is the upfront contracts. And this is the compartment that gives you confidence that both you and the prospect will understand each step of the process. You're literally just walking them through what you're going to be taking them through, what's going to happen during each interaction, so you have a clear idea of what's to come as you're moving that prospect from where they are to the actual sales. You're just being very transparent, very authentic, being upfront and talking about these things up front. The third stage that you'll see, there's this thing called pain. And the way he describes it, the way I like to read books is I like to read it to be able to teach it. So I know a good amount of it because I remember this stuff also as well. But the high point of it is once you have a bonding rapport and you have an upfront contract in terms of, what you're going to go through, how long it's going to take, and at the end, people make a decision or no decision, or agree just to not buy, that kind of upfront contract. Then he talks about this thing called pain. And just so you know, if this serves you for your business, whatever, he basically says that, people buy emotionally. They don't always, they justify logically, but a lot of decisions are made emotionally. And one of the pains things is that the surface problems that a prospect could be facing, but then the underlying reasons for those problems, and then the personal impacts it has on that prospect. How it impacts his experience with him or his business or her family. A trip through the pain compartment, is basically concludes with them agreeing, like, I have to take action. Because sometimes people don't do anything unless they feel enough pain to be able to change something. To change their diet, to change their smoking, to change things that are holding them back. And so, if you're authentically serving somebody, because that's what sales was meant to be, is meant to be not, like something that was negative. It was meant to, like, how do you serve somebody? It helps, according to the system, to acknowledge that person's pain that they're trying to bury, so that they could feel it, so they could take action, so that they could make something better. And so that's the pain step. After that, you go to the budget step. And the budget step is, once you move through the budget step, this is the step now that can be transformed from the traditional experience that most people do in sales, where they're begging, for a hint of the price or something, and, trying to get a range of what the prospect could see, basically to helping the salesperson craft a real, helping them find a solution. So that they recommend that you don't exit the budget compartment of the submarine until you cover, other resource commitments, like their time, their personnel, things like their delivery dates and everything else like that. And then once they go through their budget, because they feel the pain, they're going through what they have, in terms of work on, then you get them to the point to move them into the decision compartment, and that's the decision step. And so while they're inside the decision compartment, you're going to review, and they're going to complete the who, the where, the when information for their buying decision, because you want a decision, because there's somebody specifically who might be making the decision that you're not talking to. It might not be them. The time it's going to take to understand the how and the what, basically the criteria that the prospect needs in order to be able to make a really good decision for themselves. And then finally, the last two compartments is this thing called fulfillment. And the fulfillment is basically, you begin the trip with the fulfillment of the compartment, by reviewing everyone's expectations. You kind of go back and check to see if anything has changed since your upfront contract. And, you go through, ask the person to prioritize his or her issues from the things that are most important to least important, talking about their pain and going back revisiting the budget. But once you're done with fulfillment, then you go to the last hatch, and that's the post-sell. After you close the hatch on the fulfillment compartment, that's basically, where the person signed on. You conclude with the post-sell, which is if the prospect needs have been, just changed to, in terms of solution, you have to stop and verify, what won't cause something called like buyer's remorse. And basically he's telling people to future pace, let people know, like, after they buy, that, they might have, there'd be times where, like, maybe that someone says they made a bad decision, and then talking to them about what to say to them, so that they, as they go back to their spouse about the decision that they made after they bought it, having, answers, so that way they get that person that they're talking to, gets the right information and stuff like that. So anyway, that's the overview of the system. But you understand, me going through this, the reason I'm going through this system is step by step is going through, and they don't go to the next compartment until they finish the first. And that's often like your life. Now, basically, to memorize this, you could use a billion different things. Lots of different ways that we've already learned in this system. You could use very simple acrostics, or acronyms. You literally could just make up a word, that starts, like, take the first letter of each of these things and make up a word that just, a sentence. Like, let's say, the B for bonding, you just think of Bob, right? And then the U, stands for another word, if you want. I mean, like, let's say it utilizes. So Bob utilized, that reminds you of upfront, and then the P, for pain, you just memorize the P, and, so you'd use parrots, so it was like Bob utilized the parrots, and so they built like some kind of acrostic. What I like most of all, and some people chain link, they literally would take each of these 7 things, turn into a picture. So bonding, they would think of something that's bonding, like a sales bond, if you will, or handcuffs, something that bonds somebody. Upfront contract, they would just think of like a contract. Pain, they could think of something that gives them pain. And they'll literally use a chain linking method, and they'll take the U.S. Treasury bonds, and then they'll associate it to something upfront, like a countertop, and then they'll associate it to pain. And whatever becomes pain for them, like they're hurting their hand. Then budget, they'll use money, and a decision, they use like a decision tree or something that reminds them of decision. I use a knife, like incision. Fulfillment, you see the person completely happy, or post-sell, so you still to create pictures, and then they'll chain link them together. If they don't chain link them, how they'll memorize things in order is they use the location method. And so they'll take 7 locations in their house, in their office, or even better, like something they're going to bring with them into the sales call, like their computer or their phone or their briefcase, and they'll take 7 locations on those places, and then they'll put the 7 different things they need to memorize, images. So that would be the goal. Now, we went over in time here, but there's 3 parts of this. You want to review this so you can rewatch it, over and over again. So review is very important. The second thing, you want to use this. Practice this. Think about the things that you need to remember in order. They might not be recipes, they might not be combinations, that might be a sales system. Take the things that you need to remember in order and do the best you can to memorize it. And we use chain linking, we use sun list, we use location method, we use we use alphanumeric code, all these different ways to be able to memorize, easy as pie, and so on, acrostics. Whatever works for you, practice it, use it. And then finally, teach it. Teach it to someone else, because when you teach it, you get to learn it twice. And really what this is, when we're talking about step by step, is this. Just take the first step. Martin Luther King, faith is taking the first step, even when you don't see the whole entire staircase. And that's the goal. The first way of being able to memorize something is to be able to do it. So take the first step. If you take this first step, like you have right now, being in this session the way that you're doing, you'll take the second step, and you'll take the third step. And before you know it, you'll turn around and you'll look how far you've come with a big smile on your face. Because lots of time you don't see it. You don't see your growth that you're making right now. Even though that we're a couple months into this, we have much more time to keep on going because of we've extended this and added bonuses and so on. But you don't see how far you've come because you're in it. It's kind of like this child here. If your child, it's growing every single month. Maybe you don't see it because you're there all the time. But I guarantee you, your friends do. Your friend only sees a child every few months, and so it's so much bigger because they see it, because there's been more time lapse. Same with you. So look how far you've come so far. Take the first step, and then we're going to go to this, go up this staircase together, literally taking to new levels and new heights. And I could tell you from the top of this, when it comes to your brain, it comes to your learning, the view is incredible.